Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing a faux lime wash. And what that is a method of painting that gives depth and texture to the walls. The tools we're going to need for this are a paint tray divided in half. I just used cardboard and duct tape. A brush for cutting the edges. A 6-inch deck stain brush, and a lamb's wool floor stain applicator. And then, of course, your selection of paint. Now, in selecting your paint, you want to get at least two shades of paint that are close to the same color, but a couple shades apart, depending on how much depth and texture you want. The more contrast in the shades, the more depth and texture you will have, but you can go too far. You can use up to 3 colors, but we're just going to use 2 on this. This painting method sounds pretty complicated, but it's a lot more simple than it sounds. And compared to the price of real lime wash paint, this is far cheaper. So let's get ready to get started. Okay, we're going to start by pouring 1 color on each side of the divided paint. You want to start with a brush that's a little damp. That'll just slightly thin out the paint and make it easier to spread. You also want to get your lamb's wool a little damp as well. I'm going to do that just by dripping my brush in the water and brushing it on. You don't want it soaking wet, just damp. Same with the brush, just damp. Then you want to prime your lamb's wool. Still a little bit too wet for my taste. There we go. And you do that by dipping your brush half on one side and half on the other. You just want to dab the paint on just a little bit. Just kind of get a good mixture. And then you'll set that aside. You don't need it yet. And really, all you're doing is X patterns. It's okay to get it a little thin. And if it looks like it's too streaky, you can just lightly tap. With the lamb's wool. with the first coat, really all you're doing is laying down a base. It'll still have some of the varying contrast, but most of the fading and that will be done during the second coat. One thing that's recommended, and I didn't do it in this project, but if I do it again, I probably will, is around the edges of each wall and in the corners, paint using the darkest color. Cut the edges with the dark color, and then as you mix, you fade into that. Gives it a little more depth, and I think it would have looked a little better. But when you're doing the first coat, you don't really need to worry too much about fading it. Fading it with the brush is probably sufficient, because you'll be doing a lot of fading on the second coat, that's where you'll be concerned about streakiness and brush marks. I learned all this after a while of trying to do the first coat and getting it faded right and getting it looking right, and then I realized I'm going to be going over it all anyway, so it really didn't matter how good I got it on the first coat. And then give it a little texture, tone, kind of blend in. Use my work on little areas at a time. Continuing with the X pattern. You don't want to go over areas too much, because then you'll just blend the colors and you won't get that contrast. If you think it looks a little streaky, just give it some taps. Okay, real quick, I want to talk about a couple things I've learned so far. The most important thing is when you're working your brush, you don't want to dab it. You want to feather it in. When you dab it, it leaves lines. If you feather it in, it smooths it out. The other thing, the first coat is probably going to be streaky a little bit, but when you go to do the second coat, that's when you'll put a little more water on your brush. And this is a water-based paint, so you don't want it soaking wet, but just a little more damp. And that way it'll thin the paint out a little bit and it'll blend better. For cutting corners and edges, I saw one person said to do that with your darkest color. And that's what I did around the door here. But when I filled in the rest, all you saw was the real dark color. So I think the best thing to do is to use a mix of both. And that's kind of what I was doing with this brush, was getting it in both and just kind of not mixing it completely, but just a light mix so that there's both colors all through the brush. And then just kind of dabbing it on. This door is definitely going to need another coat. I did that offline. I was trying a couple things out, a couple methods, and but it's definitely going to need another coat. So, another thing I've learned is that if you've got an area that's too light or too dark, just lean your brush harder on the opposite area, and it'll bring in more of that color. It's time to say goodbye. to Santa's helper and the cat. Any of you that have little girls might understand that.
Thought I'd tell you real quick how we ended up with this color scheme. So when I asked my daughter what color she wanted to paint her room, she said red. And in my mind, I had visions of Coke cans with bright red and white. And I was a little horrified. So I brought up the idea of a burgundy, and she was okay with burgundy. And then I brought up the idea of a lime wash, and she was excited. So that's kind of how we ended up with this color scheme.
Tell you guys, I don't know what it looks like on camera, but I think it's looking pretty good. First coat, it's always a little streaky, but when we get to the second coat, we'll smooth it all out. Give it a little more of a fuzzy look in between the contrasting colors. One thing that did occur to me, I did see a reason for painting all the corners and the edges and above the trim in the darker color first. And that's if you want dark outline faded to the lighter on the inside, which I wasn't really worried about that. So this way works fine for me. And there we have it. First coat's done. for the first time we get a real sense of what it's going to look like in here. So let's see if I can pan the camera around. There we go. It's hard to see with the shine there, but
That's a decision I might regret later. Should have just put down some plastic.
it's a little more orange on the camera than in person. It's really close to a burgundy color. And oh yeah, it really does make it look orange. When I go through on the second coat, I'm going to be blending a lot of the splotches and streaks together. And then by the time the second coat's over, it'll look about like it's supposed to. All right.
So now that this has had a couple days to dry, I wanted to give you a look at what the finished product on the walls looks like. Now, of course, I do still have the trim that I'm going to be taping off and repainting, and the door to install. But you can see in this wall how the colors fade in and out of each other. Now, the lighting in this room doesn't really do it justice. Gives it more of an orange tint, and it brings out more contrast than what is actually there, it seems. The room is actually a deep burgundy color, whereas in this room it kind of looks, in the video, it looks more of an orange and lighter color. You can also see how dirty the lens is, so let's get that cleaned up. There we go, that's better. So now you can see how the colors just fade in and out and give it an overall depth and texture that bleeds into one color in your sight. And in this case, it's a deep burgundy. So this is how it's supposed to blend together, soft changes in the colors, no sharp lines or edges. And that's kind of the goal of this, just to give it a little texture and depth. Check out this light switch cover I found on Amazon. It is a little bit darker, deeper burgundy than what the walls are, but I think it's super cute. Well, guys, it's the end of another week, and it's time for that weigh-in. Normally today, I would have spent the day editing videos, but today I ended up finishing the second coat on the lime wash wall. So the video might come out a day later. But let's get this weigh-in done, see where we're at. I tell you, I would not be surprised if I didn't lose this week. This past weekend was my 11-year-old now daughter's birthday, and we celebrated with pizza and the usual stuff. But we'll see what it did to me. Pound and a half, 323. It was 324 and a half last time. So I'll take that. That's a win. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.